everyone. Selamat pagi. It's a great pleasure for us to have Professor Kohei Wakimura, who came down from Osaka, I guess. Osaka City University to our university. So welcome to History Department. Well, normally we will have a large number of students to join the class, but since they have just examinations, so maybe they need a break. So there are a few of them are coming here, but I think that's not a problem. So once again, welcome to Department of History, Gajah Mada University. First of all, my name is Kohei. I'm Secretary of Department. On behalf of Department, I would like to welcome you to our department, and it's such a big pleasure for us to have you here. And Professor Kohei Wakimura is professor from Osaka City University, and today he will speak about population growth and historical trajectory in tropical Asia during the 19th century. So before that, I would like to introduce Professor Wakimura briefly, perhaps. And I get some documents from Google. Professor Kohei Wakimura is a professor in Osaka City University with specialty on socio-economic history of India, but also global history. He has a quite long professional career. Graduated from Faculty of Economics, Osaka City University in 1978, and then completed doctoral course in Economic, Graduate School of Economic, also in Osaka City University. And then he served as a lecturer in Faculty of Economic in the same university since April 1990, and then became associate professor in the same faculty in April 1992, and then professor in the Faculty of Economic, Osaka City University in April 1998. He has published widely about Asia in general, including an article titled Famines, Epidemic and Mortality in Northern India, 1870 and 1921. It is a chapter in a book edited by Prof and et al., Local Agrarian Society in Colonial India, Japanese Perspective, 1996. And also some other article, but his book is just appeared in 2002, titled Famines, Epidemic and Colonial Rule. It is in Japanese. But also another book, Empire and Asian Merchant Network, the Long 19th Century, also in the Japanese. So he has also published quite widely. I don't think I can read all, but it's quite a large number of works. It's quite impressive. And today the topic he will speak is also very important. It's about population growth. And I think Indonesia in the 19th century, especially Java, has a quite remarkable populations dynamic. So that we have still mysterious big questions why Javanese, for example, has a population growth is increased greatly in that period, and maybe you can also put that in comparative perspective, comparing with other tropical Asia. So, Professor Wakimura, without further ado, I will give you a floor. I think we have like normally 30 to 45 minutes. Not that long? Okay, so less than that, but feel free, just take your time. Okay, please.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much for introduction. My name is Kohei Wakimura. I'm from Osaka City University. Actually, this is the first time of visit to Indonesia. Of course, Yogyakarta. But I'm very pleased to be here. This university is very prestigious university in Indonesia, I think. Today, I'd like to talk about my present research question to be asked, to be answered. The title of the topic is Population Growth and Historical Trajectory in Tropical Asia during the 19th century. I'm now planning to start a kind of project. It is titled Multiple Development Paths and the Natural Environment in the Tropical Regions of Indian Ocean Rim, Comparison and Connections. It is a comparative study between historical trajectories of three tropical regions of the Indian Ocean Rim. I choose India. It is South Asia. And the next is Indonesia and Malaysia. They are Southeast Asia. And also Kenya, of course, which is East Africa. These three tropical regions, I'd like to compare mainly historical trajectories. My research question is how each historical trajectories has been influenced by natural environment, particularly tropical natural environment. Before going into this topic, I would like to explain my research career. I have been working on the history, socio-economic history of the India, particularly during the British period. I was interested in the socio-economic history of famines and epidemics during the late 19th century in British India. I would like to explain this period of British India during the fourth quarter century of 19th century. There occurred many famines and epidemics in British India. So many people died because of this kind of disasters. During that time in India, the population growth rate was very low, about 0.3% during the late 19th century and early 20th century due to these disasters. So I have been working on this aspect for a long time. So compared with East Asia, of course, in China during the 19th century, particularly the second half of the 19th century, there occurred some famines and some social disruptions, many people died in China. But even compared with China, in India, during the late 19th century, scale of the death toll in terms of famines and epidemics were huge. So from these observations, I thought Indian case, tropical natural environment connected with this scale of the death toll. Then I have been interested in the tropical natural environment, particularly epidemiological conditions in tropical environment, and also if we look at the famine, agricultural conditions or soil conditions in particularly semi-arid area in India are very important. So I have been thinking about these natural environmental conditions. So, and also I'm interested in the trend of population movement in India, but also I got some interest with Southeast Asian cases. Related to this research project, I now focus on the comparative study on socio-economic changes among some regions in tropical Asia during the 19th century. Particularly, I am interested in the aspect of the population growth during the 19th century in tropical Asia. Tropical Asia means, for me, it covers South Asia, mainly South Asia and Southeast Asia. According to this map, tropical wet is green color, and tropical wet and dry, and also semi-arid area. I can say these are tropical Asia. During the 19th century, some regions, for example, Java and the Philippines, of Southeast Asia, experienced surprisingly high population growth rate. However, until the late 18th century, population density had been very low in the most of Southeast Asia. I must say that until the late early modern period, Southeast Asia, most of the Southeast Asia was very sparsely populated area. But suddenly substantial population growth started in some regions of Southeast Asia. I mean, during the 19th century. So, today I'd like to ask professors who are here, what was the main factor of this population growth? Sudden high population growth rate during the 19th century. I think it is very interesting point to be asked and answered. Now I explain the situation. Population growth in Southeast Asia during the 19th century. I take up two cases. Southeast Asia recorded much higher population growth rate than any other regions during the 19th century. Compared with Europe, compared with some East Asian regions, these population growth rate was very high, higher than any other regions at the same time, during the same time, during the same period. For example, Philippines, from 1736 to 1800, it is very rough estimation. According to Norman Owen, 1%. And from the beginning of the 19th century to 1876, 1.65%. And the late 19th century, 0.9%. This is the Philippines case. And next is Java. It is also very rough estimation. There are many estimates, various estimates, but this is according to Norman Owen. From 1755 to 1815, 1.4%, and from 1815 to 1850, 1.65%, and 1850 to 1900, 1.75%. In any way, 1.65% is extremely high. If we think, if we compare with any other cases, what is the main factor of the this high population growth rate to be asked and answered? Now, I turn to the South Asian Indian case. Here we find a modeled pattern, various pattern of population growth. But we can simplify. There are two patterns of population growth during the first half of the 19th century. First is Eastern zone. It means Eastern India, Southern India. In these zones, there was relatively high annual growth rate. less than 1%, but relatively high, but less than Southeast Asian cases. And on the other hand, secondly, northern zone, western zone, central zone, it means northern India, western India, and central India, a very low growth rate. This is the first half of the 19th century. And during the second half of the 19th century, as I already explained, during the second half of the 19th century, many famines and epidemics happened. The population growth rates were very low, averagely very low. 0.37% from 1871 to 1920. This half century, population growth rate was very low. This is a case of South Asia. This is a table. Yellow color is high, comparatively high population growth rate, eastern zone and southern zone. Particularly southern zone is a little bit similar to Southeast Asian cases. Eastern zone too. But western zone, central zone, northern zone, these are semi-arid area. Population growth rate was relatively low. Anyway, we must think about what are the causes of high population growth in Southeast Asia during the 19th century. I don't know much about the studies on these aspects because I'm not expert in Southeast Asian history, but recent years I have read some scholarly books on these topics. There are various theories which try to explain such a population growth. If there is high population growth rate, there must be decline of mortality rate or increase of fertility rate, or both contributed to the high population growth. It has been said that the decline of mortality must have contributed to high population growth rate to some extent during the 19th century. But according to some studies, medical science has not so improved during the 19th century. In case of Southeast Asia, contribution of the medical science, and also increase of living standard, we can say this increase of the standard of living contributed to the decline of mortality so much. There are many theories. However, one Dutch scholar, David Henry, I was impressed very much with his work. David Henry formulated a very interesting hypothesis. He insisted that substantial population growth must have been caused by the increase of fertility in Philippines and Java during the 19th century. He attributed this fertility increase to the economic boom, particularly to primary goods export growth. In the case of Java, even cultivation system period experienced high population growth rate. How can we explain this high population growth during that period? But David Henry, I think it's a kind of a revisionist interpretation. During the cultivations, the period of the cultivation system, a kind of economic boom contributed to the increase of fertility rate, according to his interpretation. I don't know exactly the situation during that period, exact real situation during that period. I would like to ask Professor here to give me some suggestions about this kind of interpretation. As you know, during the 19th century, there was export growth in Southeast Asia. In case of Philippines, export growth since the late 1820s, particularly primary goods or sugar, tobacco, etc. In case of Java, export growth since 1780s, particularly sugar and coffee. This table is a case of Java. Annual growth rate of export 4.6%, very high, very high. This is very high. So in any way, it can be said that David Henry's interpretation, if we think we can relate this export growth to movement of fertility. This is for primary goods: cloves, pepper, sugar, and coffee. But particularly sugar and coffee, this period substantially increased during the first half of the 19th century. This is also high population growth rate period. Now I close my this short presentation. I have already explained different historical trajectories in terms of population growth between Southeast Asia and South Asia during the 19th century. Both regions tropical, belongs to tropical Asia. Southeast Asia, high population growth rate. South Asia, various patterns of population growth, but particularly during the late 19th century, population growth rate decreased very much. I have not said anything about comparison between Southeast Asia and East Asia, but now I explain a little bit about East Asia with comparative perspective. I think there is different historical trajectories in terms of population growth between Southeast Asia and East Asia. In case of East Asia, the period of high population growth was much earlier. In case of China, 18th century. Population growth rate was very high in Chinese case in 18th century. But Southeast Asian cases, 18th century, until the late 18th century, population growth rate was very low. But suddenly 19th century, from the late 18th century, it increased. There is a much difference between Southeast Asia and East Asia. And I would like to emphasize Southeast Asian case is Southeast Asia is a tropical zone, and East Asia is a temperate zone. So environmental conditions, natural environmental conditions are different between two cases. Finally, I would like to add one more point. There is different historical trajectory, even in the tropical zone, even within tropical zone, between Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. In case of Sub-Saharan Africa, the period of high growth, high population growth was much later. The second half of the 20th century. there was high population growth period. So within a tropical zone, there is much difference of the historical trajectories in terms of population growth. So we need to think about these issues. Anyway, I have just started this kind of research project. So Java or Indonesia is very important area for me, for my research project. If you have any suggestions, I'd like to ask you, give us some advices or suggestions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Wakimura. Well, population's growth in global context in the 19th century is indeed still a puzzle in history, and especially as we have seen from the slides and presentation of Professor Wakimura, that there is historical development, different trajectories of historical development in terms of population growth between, for example, Southeast Asia and Southeast Asia. In South Asia in 19th century, the population growth rate are less, much less, due, according to Professor Wakimura, environmental constraint. But in the same period, more or less, in Southeast Asia, saw very different trajectory. It was increased, it has almost exploded because it's exploded, especially in Java. In the meantime, for example, colonial government launched the so-called cultivation system, and according to David Henley, perhaps this is also connected with that. So the increase of the export product, to a certain extent improve the economic conditions of population. So the living standard also increased, and that's also affected the population growth. But interestingly, in the same tropical zone of Sub-Saharan Africa, this is not happening. The population growth in this zone, in this area, was coming later in the second half of 20th century. So still, this is a big puzzle. What was actually the factors that, especially for the Southeast Asia and Java in particular, to have certain very remarkable development of population growth? And we are very lucky here. We have Dr. Thomas Lindblad, who is also economic historian, and Professor Suhartono as well, and also Dr. Margono sitting in the back. So, as Professor Wakimura has wishes as well, please give some response. And for the first opportunity, I would like to invite 2 or 3 of responses, questions, suggestions, or whatever. Mas Margono, Professor Suhartono, Pak Thomas. Okay, Dr. Margono.
Thank you very much for this occasion. First of all, I'd like to welcome Professor Wakimura here at Pembicara University. My name is Dr. Sri Margono. I am the head of the Department of History at Pembicara University. This is very interesting topic. Even for us, this is a topic that we have discussed a long time ago, but still interesting to be compared with other regions, especially in Asia and perhaps even in Europe, perhaps. But there is something that that I want to suggest. First is that we have to bear in mind that the data on the population group in Java or in Indonesia as a whole was still in question mark, especially the accuracy of the number. So most of data on the population during that period are still very much speculative, because the only population census only happened in 1930s. So, but it doesn't mean that there's no data that we could not refer to. Especially Raffles has done a lot of work, and quite detailed actually, if you examine this, how Raffles in 1813 to 1816 tried to also make a census of population in Java. And Prof has discussed that very long in his long article. You can refer to his work. And then the other thing is that we have to consider a few factors for the increasing of the population in that period. First, because during the 17th and 18th century, Java was endemic of war. So many wars happened during that period. This was from the beginning of the 16th century until the end of the 18th century. Even until 1830, when the Java War was ended. Yeah. So that's why it's also, of course, this gave a lot of impact on economic development, of course, also on the migration population. And the other factor is that after the Java War, the situation become more peaceful. It means that there's time for population to grow in that time. Then the other thing is that if you're looking at the work of Robert Elson on the village in Java under cultivation system, you will see the climate. Because so far, before this book, all the people historian in Indonesia almost believe that cultivation system has very destructive effect, especially in Cirebon, and there's a famine there, and Grobogan, Brodati, thing like that. But Elson has shown us a study that what happened is actually like a paradox, because cultivation system also opened the population for free works. They not even they also obliged to plant some certain crops, but also open for the free work. For instance, in the transportation and the other field of the cultivation. So this is also in what you call it, open opportunity for the population to get a better life in Java. And this is also because after the cultivation system ended in 1870, then the government applied the liberal system. There are a lot of investment in Java from the foreign capital. So it's also make the economy in Java even more developed. And the more plantation developed in Java, it means that even in some places that the labor that work on the plantation has to be imported from other islands to Java. So that's why perhaps there's optimism among the population that there's a lot of hopes in Java that the investment increased during that time. So they and you see that the political situation become more and more stable in the late 19th until to the late 19th century. So that's all the aspects of that, what you call it, make the population increase. Anyway, there's a lot of data on the population that's been collected by a big project called Changing Indonesian Economy. There's a, if I'm not mistaken, there's a 26 volume or 20, I forget, 26 volume on the project of changing economy Indonesia, and population trend is one of the volumes that edited by Peter Prof. Yeah, Peter Prof has edited the collection of the population trend in Indonesia since, I think, since the late 18th century until late colonial period. So that's the only quantitative data that we can refer to in terms of population trend in Indonesia. And one more thing that perhaps we could consider in studying this population is that the increasing project by government on healthcare, and the healthcare project, especially when the development of the plantation become bigger and bigger in Java, that's also affected on some new disease.
Oh,
of course, like pests, like many diseases because of this development, and it caused many new diseases appear in Java, and the European also afraid if they affected to the most, so they want to make population healthier, so they also set up a project on the healthcare to the population that also increased the living expectation in Java at that time. So that's another one that I can suggest to you. Thank you.
thank you very much. Thank you. Very good point. You gave me. Thank you very much.
Professor Tamu.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting lecture. I think talking about population, especially population growth, I think that, very interesting, and it has many impact of the growth of the population. So we know that up to the present time, the population is a power. Is that right? I think, as we know in China, how many population in China and how many population in India. But there are many countries with very limited population. I think that it must be thought by one thing that certain countries has a policy, maybe politically or economically or maybe philosophically. I don't know, but I think that you may explain not in general reason that the reason are economically, environmentally, socio-economically, but I would like to ask you about the philosophical background of their. I mean, it's and has a certain philosophy reasons. I think that is very important. For instance, for example, China and India. I think that India and China that try to their population growth. What they want, but no idea to stop or to limit its growth. I don't know why. Is that a special concept or maybe philosophical background which happened in maybe two countries? Here in especially especially Java. Yeah. There is a proverb. Each child has their own destiny. Ya, tiap anak bawa nasibnya sendiri-sendiri, biar anaknya 12 atau 2. I think that this I try to comparative concept between Java and maybe I don't know about India. India, or maybe they are happy if they have large maybe large people or large population. Is that I mean that is that philosophy which make happy for the nation, Indonesian or maybe Chinese nation? That's I would like that. Thank you very much.
Mas?
Well, thank you for a most inspiring. Thank you for an inspiring introduction to a very ambitious new research program on globalization and the environment and the whole Indian Ocean range. I would like to take up one or two points which have already been mentioned in the discussion. First of all, what Dr. Margono mentioned about the data. I think that is a very valid, very important point, because there is like a puzzle or a mystery in the historiography that why were there so few people in Java in 1800, and that was actually the starting point of Peter Bomhardt's work, and which you cite here in his dissertation from 1989. He wanted to find out what is the real what are the real population figures for Java, because there is quite a realistic chance that the population figures are too low, or much too low. And I myself not at all an expert on Java. I'm more specialized in my research on the outer islands, but I have been studying the outer islands like Sumatra, Kalimantan and Sulawesi in the late 19th century and in the early 20th century. And I wanted to find out how many people are there. So I looked at the census, and it jumped from 1905 to 1920, and then again from 1920 to 1930. And then I realized they simply discovered more people. Because the colonial officials went into the villages in Sumatra and Kalimantan, and they saw a lot of people they hadn't seen before. So it was not a natural, it was an impossible natural growth. And perhaps the situation was a bit better in Java, but I think we must not forget that in Java the administration of a colonial state was actually taking shape in the early 19th century. And the VOC had a lot of power in Java, but it was not a colonial state. But the colonial state emerged in Java, which also meant that there were colonial officers collecting information. So I think the information issue is something that must be not be forgotten. When the book by, and that's the second point I'd like to raise, when the book by Peter Bomhardt came out, it was a kind of a revival of a socio-economic explanation, not so much environment, but simply looking at the interrelationship between the economic development and demographic behavior. And his idea was that the economy improved, so people changed, their demographic behavior, they wanted more children, and which sounds very plausible, but it goes against the classic idea of a cultivation system as a system of exploitation, a very bad system, very destructive system. But as people have shown, it was bad exploitation, but not everywhere, not to the same degree. And there was a great deal of variety in the system. And also, one must not forget, when talking about the cultivation system, that people did get money. They did get a wage, not a big wage. They had to work much harder than before. And when they did not get a wage, but they did get a wage, which means that for a family, it can be very sensible to have more children. Of course, the children can also work, and they can bring in money to the household. So the household income can increase in that way. And, well, nowadays, when in families with parents talk more about the cost of having children, that it's expensive with children, but it can also be an economic benefit to have a lot of children. The final point, there's actually, I very much believe in David Handy's explanation. David Handy, in fact, offers a bit of a correction of Peter Baumgartner. He says most of it is okay, but he doesn't believe everything of it, and so here he uses Peter Baumgartner's conclusion to make a more realistic version, using his own research from Sulawesi, which is of course not applicable to Java. The final point I'd like to raise is the question: where is the environment in the 19th century analysis? And you refer here to Anthony Reid, but you refer to his earlier publications on environment, and not to his last book, which was published in 2016, and which contains a very interesting theory why Southeast Asia was so thinly populated in the earlier centuries, before the 19th century. His idea is, I cannot reproduce it completely from my head, but his idea is something like there were not so many natural harbors, the connections by river were not so good, but the land, the inland was very fertile, so it was logical for people to stay in the inland where they needed a lot of land and where they could produce goods which could then be sold. But in that way, the urbanization was very low compared to, for instance, India or other parts of Asia. And with low urbanization meant little population growth. So according to Tony Reid, the environment explains why Southeast Asia was exceptionally thinly populated before the 19th century. But then in the 19th century, as it were, the socio-economic factors took over from the environment. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you. There's three questions and suggestions. I think Dr. Margono mentioned about data and then also some historical development of Java, and something that you have to be reminded as well. And Professor Suhartono reminds us as well the importance of cultural factor in Java, especially when we talk about the demographic increase, the demographic growth, because there's a belief among Javanese that having children will give you more opportunity in economy. And Thomas mostly, but reminds me of a lot of things actually, the data as well, but also some situation that to get more carefully about the literature and especially the Henry works, etc., etc. But also the environmental aspect that a bit missed in your presentation. You want to respond this to you? No? Okay. Right. So next round. Are there still any questions from student? Perhaps anything? Just feel free. Jangan takut. Don't worry. Huh? Okay.
Perhaps I can add about the environment. Sorry, I was a little bit late to come to your presentation, especially when you're talking about environments. Whether this is one of the main element of your analysis, how environments influence the population. But we also see much that Java was, we call it a ring of fire, you know. There's a lot of volcanoes and there's a lot of, you know,
earthquake.
Yeah. It also gives a good aspect for the agriculture after, for instance, after the eruption or something like that. But there's also cause many dangers for the population. At the same time, this paradoxical aspect can happen in Java, and it's happened during the 18th and 19th century as well. That's why in the beginning, in the late of 18th century, there's a lot of experts, environmental experts from Europe coming to Java to do research about it, and this is good to invent some environment event, a disaster or something, for instance, to check how much the impact of these environments in Java. But there's a lot of data on geology, there's a lot of data on geography. There's also from the forestry, agriculture, plantation that have done in late 19th century and beginning of the 20th century. A lot of research on environments in Indonesia. And the deforestation and then this deforestation was also the impact on the population growth or the increase of plantation. That is also a effect on that. Because then used to be forest only used for you know, they take the wood for the building some building, to build some building or something. But now they extend the plantation by deforestation, and that's also give a hope to the population. But at the same time, the extensive development of the agricultural sector and plantation sector can be calculated as well in that period, because then there more space for in Java by the changing of this environment. They give opportunity for the people to develop their economy. And other data that might also important is that some data given by association of the environment activists that also developed in the late 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. They also make there's some sponsored by the state, some are sponsored by the foundation, some sponsored individually by some prominent figure in the environmentalists. So we can also look at that one to consider. I think in the National Archive, Jakarta, there's also some archive in dealing with this issue, and perhaps there's a during 19th and the 20th century there's also some important journals published in that period, like Tectona is on the forestry, and then also in the some journal focus on the healthcare, and also volcano geology, also published in Inland India or in Java in that period. So you can refer to that. And I think all those journal and report can be found in whether in Arsip Nasional, Perpustakaan Nasional Indonesia, or in the KTLP Leiden, Holland, or also some other places which also kept this kind of collection. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Margono. If not, then myself have not a question actually. You mentioned about the medical development. Yeah, I think this is also important, and Dr. Margono has mentioned, I guess, in his response. But what I heard from you that the medical development, the medical knowledge is not developed during the 19th century. But according to my reading, as Pak Margono has also mentioned them, actually in Java especially, vaccination, for example, smallpox vaccination has been started quite early. It's 1970s, if I'm not mistaken. And that's also has to do with the effort of the Europeans to prevent this endemic, tropical disease to affect them as well. So they make a local population healthier in that sense. And not only smallpox, I guess, cholera, pest, and it's really took off since 1870s, and that's make things, perhaps better in terms of medical situation, public, so maybe that's another thing that you should consider when you put Java in your map of comparison. But since there's no question, so I would like you to give a little bit explanation, perhaps, to us. We're not really good in comparative perspective, so you might explain why, for example, East Asia has a population growth earlier than South Asia and Southeast Asia, while African, Sub-Saharan Africa comes later, in the second half of 20th century. What kind of factors that make this happen? Perhaps just briefly you can elaborate. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think in case of East Asia, I explained the Japanese case. In the first half of the 17th century, the beginning of the Edo period, so very long period of rule from the beginning of the 17th century to the late 19th century. Tokugawa shogunate ruled Japan, but the population increased in the first half of the 17th century, substantially increased. But since 17th century, 18th century to 19th century, almost no increase at all. Stable, very stable. In case of Japan. But anyway, in the first half of the 17th century, it increased, substantially increased. Just because of the intensive, labor-intensive agriculture developed during that time.
Well, so it's not really natural or environmental explanation.
But I think
socio-economic.
But I think, of course, it is not causes of the development is not. We cannot say it is because of natural conditions, but we can say that this development happened much earlier in temperate zone than in tropical zone. In case of China, 18th century, population growth was very substantial during the Qin period, Qin dynasty period. It's one of the reasons is, I think, intensive, labor-intensive agriculture developed during that time, and also kind of development of market during that time. In case of China. So I think ecological or environmental constraint was not so serious in temperate zones. But in case of tropical zone, I think conditions, particularly epidemiological factors, and also agricultural, environmental factors. I think in case of the Southeast Asia, it's not so easy to develop labor-intensive agriculture until the later 18th century. This is just my guessmate. Sorry.
Yes, okay.
Some information.
Yes, please. Microphone there. Yeah.
I'm his wife. I'm his wife, and I would like to about in case of Japan, that he said the sudden growth of the population in the first 19th century.
No. First half of 17th century.
Oh yes, 17th century. Before that, the Edo era, the time was war. And after that, that's the political stables continued for 300 years.
250.
200 years before the America came to our country. So I think the political stableness.
Yes,
Of course. And also the system of network of political organization to govern people. And many of almost all the nations, the percentage of 80 or something is farmers. And he said about the intensive agricultural system is a kind of knowledge that how to grow the rice plant. And that knowledge is extended for the Japanese. And why the stableness of the population, I think the 3,000 million.
So
30 million.
30 million.
30 million. At the continent. We think that is the highest our country could feed the towns and I think, is that not? I think that yes, there's no wars and there's no trade with, very limited trade with Poland and China, and we are very
Close.
yeah, closed. So that is the explanation we generally know. Isn't that?
Yes, of course. I think Professor Wakimura would be definitely agree with you. Okay, so I think we have a quite enough and quite fruitful discussion. And thank you so much, Professor Wakimura, for sharing your ideas and research with us here in the Department of History. And on behalf of the Department of History, I would like to thank you. And also thanks to Dr. Thomas Linda, Professor Suhartono, and to all of you students who came and joined our session today. And let's we give a big applause to Professor Wakimura. Thank you so much, and we can continue our discussion informally after this perhaps. Thank you so much. Selamat siang dan sampai bertemu dengan event berikutnya. Nanti siang ada diskusi buku Remy Manedier dari Prancis jam 12.30 saya kira akan main. Thank you, and we can meet again in the next occasion perhaps. On Monday we will have a guest lecture from the Netherlands. It's Marolin van Pachi. She will give a presentation about shared history Indonesia and the Netherlands. If you are interested, please come and join. It will be take place on 9th in the morning in this room. Thank you and selamat siang.